The moment Brandon and Olivia sat me down for their family meeting, I knew something was wrong. Their polished presentation revealed their true colors. I was either to move into their basement to become their free nanny and housekeeper, or hand over my retirement savings for their new home. After 40 years of putting everyone first, supporting my late husband's career, raising my children, caring for my aging parents, my own son saw me as nothing but a resource to exploit. "Mom, it's time you finally paid us back," Brandon said, as if my decades of sacrifice meant nothing. Olivia nodded along, already having designed my basement suite, really just glorified servants' quarters. They expected me to serve his fiancée or give up my savings. They never imagined I'd choose luxury living instead. They thought I'd cave like I always had. They were wrong. The smell of pot roast filled my kitchen as I wiped my hands on my apron and checked the clock. Brandon was bringing his girlfriend for Sunday dinner, and he'd been especially insistent they had something important to discuss. At 68, I'd learned to recognize when my only son was building up to something. The last time he used that tone, he'd told me he was dropping out of the graduate program I'd helped pay for to find himself in Thailand for 6 months. I smoothed down my blouse and adjusted the pearl necklace Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary, 5 years before cancer took him. The doorbell rang right at 5 o'clock. Brandon had always been punctual, if nothing else. "Mom," Brandon said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. He was tall like his father, with the same strong jaw and confidence. "This is Olivia." The woman beside him was elegant in a way I'd never managed, even in my youth. Her sleek dark hair fell in a perfect bob, and her manicure matched her designer handbag. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Collins," Olivia said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she handed me a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Over dinner, they made their announcement. "We're engaged," Brandon said, as Olivia extended her hand to display a diamond that caught the light from my dining room chandelier. I gasped appropriately and got up to hug them both. "I'm so happy for you," I said, and I meant it. After Harold died, I'd worried about Brandon, who seemed to drift between relationships. At 38, I'd begun to wonder if he'd ever settle down. As I served the apple pie I'd baked that morning, Brandon pointed out that the crust was a bit overdone on one side. Olivia politely ate 2 bites before setting down her fork. I remembered Harold's mother doing the same thing to me when we were newlyweds, silently judging my cooking while pretending to praise it. "Mrs. Collins," Olivia said as I cleared the plates, "Brandon tells me you were a nurse before you retired." "Yes, for 40 years, I replied. "I worked while raising Brandon after his father's hours at the firm got longer, then part-time while caring for Harold during his illness, and back to full-time after he passed." "Such a nurturing profession," Olivia said with that same smile that didn't warm her eyes. "Brandon says you also took care of your parents in their final years." "My mother had Alzheimer's," I explained. "She lived with us for the last 3 years of her life. My father joined us after she passed. He couldn't manage alone with his heart condition." "Mom's always been the caretaker," Brandon said, his tone suggesting this was some kind of natural law rather than choices I'd made out of love and obligation. "She's happiest when she's looking after others." I didn't correct him, though it wasn't entirely true. I'd had dreams once of traveling, of taking art classes, of writing the children's book I'd outlined decades ago. But life had other plans, and I'd accepted them without complaint. A week later, Brandon called to invite me to what he termed an important family meeting at their apartment across town. The formality of the invitation struck me as odd. When I arrived, Brandon and Olivia had prepared what looked like a business presentation. They'd even printed handouts with bullet points and graphs. "Mom," Brandon began once I was seated on their white sofa with a glass of water, "Olivia and I have been discussing our future, and we want to include you in our plans." Olivia clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint slide appeared on the television screen. "Family integration strategy," it read. "With housing costs what they are," Brandon continued, and our plans to start a family soon. We've been exploring the most efficient way to move forward financially while ensuring family cohesion. I nodded, not yet understanding where this was headed. We've identified two viable options that would benefit everyone, Olivia said, advancing to the next slide. Option A, family cohabitation. Brandon took over. You'd sell your house and move into our new home. We've found a perfect property with a finished basement we could convert into a private suite for you. In exchange, you'd help with childcare once we have kids and manage household duties while Olivia and I focus on our careers. Before I could respond, Olivia advanced to the next slide. Option B, family financial consolidation. If you prefer to maintain your independent living situation, she explained, you could contribute your savings toward our down payment on a larger home. This would allow us to afford appropriate childcare and domestic help while still keeping you involved as a grandmother. My mouth went dry. I took a sip of water to hide my shock. We know how important family is to you, Mom, Brandon said, his voice softening in a way that reminded me of when he'd ask for money in college. After all you've done for everyone else, this is your chance to continue that legacy. I see, I managed to say. And these are my only options. They exchanged a look. Well, these are the scenarios that make the most financial and practical sense, Olivia explained. Brandon has told me how you always put family first. This is just a more structured approach to continuing that tradition. And my retirement savings, I asked carefully. In option B, would I be investing in the house? Would my name be on the deed? Brandon shifted uncomfortably. We thought it would be simpler as a gift, actually. Legally cleaner. Plus, you'd always have a place with us regardless. A gift, my 30 years of careful saving, the overtime shifts I'd worked while raising him alone, the vacations I'd never taken, the second-hand clothes I'd worn so he could have new ones, all of it reduced to a gift for a son who apparently couldn't be bothered to even offer me equity in return. I'll need some time to think about this, I said, setting down my glass. The water had left a ring on their pristine coffee table. I didn't wipe it away. Of course, Olivia said brightly. We don't need an answer today, but the real estate market is moving quickly, and we'd like to lock in a property by the end of the month. As I drove home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of others. Harold through law school and then cancer, Brandon through childhood and beyond, my parents in their declining years. Now at 68, when I should have been enjoying the fruits of my labor, my son was presenting me with an ultimatum: serve or pay. The next day, I called my friend Vivian. Unlike me, Vivian had divorced 30 years ago and built a career in real estate. She'd moved into Sunset Palms, a luxury retirement community, 6 months ago after selling her last property. Marge, you have to come see this place, she'd been telling me. It's like a cruise ship that never leaves port. I'd been putting her off, thinking such a place wasn't for me. But now I needed perspective from someone who'd never let life's expectations dictate her choices. Over lunch in Sunset Palms' elegant dining room, I told her about Brandon and Olivia's proposal. The nerve, Vivian said, stabbing a piece of salmon with her fork. And they presented it with PowerPoint, like some corporate takeover. I nodded, looking around at the bright, spacious room where residents chatted over wine and fresh food that someone else had prepared. Through the large windows, I could see gardens and a swimming pool where a water aerobics class was in progress. Do you know what I think? Vivian asked, leaning forward. I think they see you as Brandon's mother and nothing else, not as Margaret Collins, woman with her own life and dreams. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in the role of caretaker. When will it be your turn, Marge? Vivian asked softly. If not now, when? After lunch with Vivian, I found myself taking a tour of Sunset Palms. The leasing manager, a bubbly woman named Patricia, showed me various floor plans. The one-bedroom apartments were more spacious than I'd expected, with balconies overlooking either gardens or the golf course. All utilities are included, Patricia explained as we walked through a model unit. Plus weekly housekeeping, all meals if you want them, though each apartment has a full kitchen. The activities calendar is always full: art classes, book clubs, fitness, day trips. I paused by the large windows watching residents play bocce on a manicured lawn. A white-haired man laughed as he made a shot, his companions clapping. And the buy-in cost? I asked, bracing myself. Patricia named a figure that was substantial but not impossible given the equity in my house. The monthly fee was manageable with my pension and savings. We have a wait list for most units, she added. But as luck would have it, we just had a cancellation for a garden view one-bedroom. It would be available next month if you're interested. I told her I needed to think about it, but before leaving, I put my name on a waiting list and left a refundable deposit. Just in case. For the next week, I found myself researching retirement communities, running financial calculations, and envisioning two very different futures. In one, I lived in Brandon and Olivia's basement, waking early to prepare breakfast before taking care of their children, doing laundry, and cooking dinner. In the other, I woke in my own apartment, deciding for myself how to spend each day. Brandon called twice that week, each time casually mentioning houses they were looking at. There's this amazing property in River Oaks, he said during our second call. 5 bedrooms, a mother-in-law suite downstairs. But it's about $100,000 over our budget unless we get some help with the down payment. That's quite expensive, I replied noncommittally. Well, you always said you wanted us to have the best, Mom, he reminded me. And think about your future grandchildren growing up in such a nice neighborhood with good schools. Another day, Olivia texted me pictures of basement renovations she'd found online, writing, "Inspiration for your suite. We could do something like this, but even nicer." The images showed small, windowless spaces with Murphy beds and mini refrigerators. Glorified maids' quarters, really. In one photo, she'd circled a desk area with the note, "Perfect for when you help the kids with homework after school." I hadn't agreed to anything yet, but they were already planning my servitude. The breaking point came at another family dinner, this time at a restaurant of their choosing, expensive, with tiny portions that left me hungry. Brandon brought a folder containing mortgage pre-approval papers. "The bank wants to see your financial statements, Mom," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "They need to verify the gift funds. I brought the paperwork so you can sign." Olivia nodded encouragingly. "We've also drafted a little family contract about household expectations, just so everyone's on the same page from day one. Nothing formal, just clarity about childcare hours, meal preparation, that sort of thing." I stared at them, feeling something shift inside me. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to use the restroom." In the bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop and looked at my reflection. The face that stared back was tired, the eyes uncertain. I was a nurse who'd spent decades caring for others, yet I couldn't diagnose what was happening to me now. Or perhaps I could, but I'd been ignoring the symptoms. When had I become someone whose worth was measured only by what I could provide to others? When had my son started seeing me as a resource rather than a person? I straightened my shoulders and returned to the table. "I've made my decision," I said calmly, their faces brightened, expecting acquiescence. "I'm not going to move in with you, and I'm not giving you my savings." Their expressions froze. Brandon recovered first. "Mom, be reasonable. You haven't even looked at the houses we're considering." "I don't need to," I replied. "I'm making different plans." "What plans?" Olivia asked, her voice sharp. "My own." The next day, I called my bank and made an appointment with a financial advisor. Harold had always handled our investments, and after his death, I just maintained what he'd set up. Now I needed to understand exactly where I stood. The news was better than I'd expected. Between Harold's life insurance, my pension, Social Security, and our modest investments, I had enough to live comfortably for many years, assuming reasonable health. The equity from selling my house would provide an additional cushion. "You're in good shape, Mrs. Collins," the advisor told me. "Your late husband made solid choices, and you've been disciplined about not depleting the principal." I left the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I called Patricia at Sunset Palms and confirmed I wanted the Garden View apartment. Then I contacted a realtor recommended by Vivian. Susan, the realtor, came the next day. She walked through my house making notes. "The market's hot right now," she said. "Your location is excellent and the house has good bones. We'll need to declutter and stage it, but I think we can list higher than you might expect." Within a week, a for sale sign appeared in my front yard. I'd begun sorting through 40 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep for my new, smaller space. It was emotional work, handling Harold's old sweaters, Brandon's childhood art projects, photo albums documenting our family's history. But it was also unexpectedly liberating, as if each box I packed or donated lightened not just my physical burden but an emotional one as well. I was wrapping Harold's fishing trophies in newspaper when Brandon's car screeched into the driveway. He stormed up to the front door and pounded on it. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" He demanded when I opened the door. He pointed at the for sale sign. "Were you going to tell me about this?" "I was planning to, yes," I said. Once I had all the details finalized. "Finalized? This is our family home, Dad's home. You can't just sell it without talking to me first." I invited him in, offered him tea that he refused, and explained my decision as calmly as I could. He paced my living room as I spoke. "So instead of helping your family, you're moving into some fancy retirement village to play bingo with old people?" he asked incredulously. "Sunset Palms offers a lot more than bingo," I said. "And yes, I'm choosing to help myself for once. This is about the basement, isn't it? We can renovate it differently if that's the issue." "It's not about the basement, Brandon. It's about being seen as a person with my own life to live, not just as your mother or a potential babysitter." His face darkened. "This is selfish, Mom, after everything we've done for you." The unfairness of that statement took my breath away. "Everything you've done for me?" "Yes, who came over to fix your garbage disposal last month, who helped you set up your new TV, who calls you every Sunday." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the sweet boy I'd raised, but a man who somehow believed that basic filial attention constituted extraordinary sacrifice. "I appreciate those things," I said carefully, "but they don't entitle you to my life savings or the next decade of my life." "I can't believe you're being like this," he said, shaking his head. "What would Dad say?" It was a low blow, using Harold against me, but for once I didn't take the bait. "Your father would want me to be happy, Brandon, just as I want you to be happy, but not at the expense of my own happiness." He left without resolving anything, the slam of his car door punctuating his displeasure. That night I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, questioning my decision. Was I being selfish? Was I abandoning my family duty? Then I remembered Vivian's question. "When will it be your turn? If not now, when?" For 3 days after Brandon stormed out, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from him. I let most go to voicemail, needing space to strengthen my resolve. His messages alternated between guilt trips and anger. "Mom, please call me back. I'm worried about you making rash decisions. I can't believe you're putting some retirement community above your own family. Dad would be so disappointed in you right now." That last one stung, but I knew it wasn't true. Harold had always encouraged me to think of myself more. In our final months together, as I sat by his hospital bed, he'd made me promise to live a little after he was gone. I hadn't honored that promise yet. On the fourth day, I answered Brandon's call. "Are you done with this nonsense yet?" he asked immediately. "It's not nonsense," I replied calmly. "I've accepted an offer on the house." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "You're really going through with this," he finally said. "You're abandoning us." "I'm not abandoning anyone, Brandon. I'm making a choice about my own life. A selfish choice." "Was it selfish when I worked double shifts to pay for your soccer camps, when I postponed my master's degree so we could afford your college tuition, when I spent every vacation day for 3 years caring for my mother so you wouldn't have to?" "That's different," he insisted. "That's what mothers do. And this is what independent adults do, make their own decisions about their lives." He switched tactics. "What about when you need help, when you get sick? Who's going to take care of you if you push us away now?" The irony wasn't lost on me. After proposing I become their live-in help, he was now positioning himself as my future caretaker. "Sunset Palms has assisted living facilities if I ever need them," I said. "And I've already updated my will and medical directives." "Your will?" His voice sharpened. "What changes are you making to your will?" In that moment, I glimpsed something ugly, a calculation behind his eyes that had nothing to do with love. That's private, I said, but you should know I'm establishing a trust for any future grandchildren's education. The rest will go to causes I care about. Another long silence. I don't recognize you anymore, he finally said. Olivia was right about you. What does that mean? She said you've always been controlling, using money to manipulate me. I defended you, but maybe she saw the real you all along. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen weeping. Not for my decision, but for the painful truth that my son saw my boundaries as manipulation. That he could so quickly side with someone who barely knew me over the mother who had given him everything. The house sold above asking price with a quick closing. The new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, loved the garden I'd tended for decades. I found comfort knowing another family would create memories in these rooms. Moving day arrived cloudy and cool. I'd hoped Brandon might show up despite our argument, but he didn't. Instead, Vivian organized a small army of helpers, her nephew with a truck, 2 kind men from her church, and 3 women from Sunset Palms who introduced themselves as my welcome committee. Don't worry about him, Vivian said, catching me glancing at the driveway again. He'll come around once he realizes Mommy isn't his ATM anymore. I wasn't so sure. The hurt ran deeper than money now. By afternoon, my belongings were settling into my new apartment at Sunset Palms. The space was smaller but filled with light, with large windows overlooking gardens bursting with spring flowers. The bedroom fit my favorite reading chair perfectly, and the kitchen, though compact, had new appliances and stone countertops. As the helpers departed, a gentle knock came at my door. A distinguished-looking man with silver hair and kind eyes stood in the hallway holding a potted orchid. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Arthur Pearson, 3B living room piano player, terrible chess opponent, and unofficial welcoming committee member." "Margaret Collins," I replied, accepting the orchid. Former nurse, mediocre gardener, and apparently new rebel against societal expectations. He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "The best kind of rebel. Would you care to join a few of us for dinner tonight? First night in a new place is always better with company." I almost declined, exhausted from the move and emotional turmoil. But then I remembered Harold's words, "Live a little." "I'd like that," I said. Dinner with Arthur and 3 other residents. A retired literature professor named Alina, a former judge called Frank, and a vivacious ex-travel agent named Sophia, turned out to be the most enjoyable evening I'd had in years. The conversation flowed from books to travel to politics, with no one treating me as if I were fragile or limiting topics because of my age. Margaret was a nurse, Arthur mentioned at one point, during the days when nurses ran hospitals while doctors took all the credit. Exactly right, I laughed. Though some of us got our revenge by marrying the doctors. Smart strategy, Sophia winked. I tried dadding a pilot once for the free flights. Turns out it's cheaper to pay for tickets than put up with a man who thinks having a uniform makes him God's gift. As we were finishing dessert, my phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away from the table to answer. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Olivia's pregnant." My heart leapt despite everything. A grandchild, but before I could congratulate him, he continued. "We need you now more than ever. Olivia is already having a rough first trimester. She can't keep working the hours she has been, and we're stretched thin with the new mortgage. You need to reconsider this retirement village nonsense." The joy drained away, replaced by familiar guilt. I looked back at the table where my new friends were laughing together, then through the dining room windows to the beautifully landscaped grounds beyond. For the first time in decades, I'd felt the stirrings of a life that belonged fully to me. "Congratulations on the baby," I said carefully. "That's wonderful news. But my decision stands." "So that's it, you're choosing strangers over your own family, over your grandchild." "I'm not choosing against anyone, Brandon, I'm choosing for myself, there's a difference." "There isn't to me," he said coldly and hung up. I returned to the table, trying to hide my distress. "Everything all right?" Arthur asked quietly as the others debated the merits of various Mediterranean cruise lines. "My son just told me I'm going to be a grandmother," I said. "And then implied I was abandoning my grandchild by living here." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. My daughter tried the same when my first grandchild came. Suddenly, I was meant to be a full-time babysitter despite living an hour away. He smiled ruefully. It took time, but she eventually realized that a happy, independent father makes a much better grandfather than a resentful live-in nanny. I hope Brandon realizes that too, I said, though doubt crept through me. Back in my new apartment that night, I unpacked a box labeled bedroom and found the framed photo of Brandon's college graduation. He was beaming in his cap and gown, Harold and I flanking him proudly. I'd worked overtime for months to help pay for his senior year after Harold's medical bills depleted our savings. I set the photo on my bedside table, a reminder of both love and sacrifice. Then I reached further into the box and pulled out something I'd packed impulsively, my old sketchbook and watercolor set, untouched for decades. Tomorrow I promised myself I would paint something, just for me. But as I drifted to sleep in my new bed, in my new life, guilt and uncertainty followed me into my dreams. Over the next few weeks, I settled into life at Sunset Palms. Each morning I woke to sunshine filtering through curtains I'd chosen myself, with no obligations except those I created. The first week I simply explored the walking paths that wound through gardens, the library with its wall of windows, the art studio where residents worked on projects ranging from ceramics to oil paintings. I met more neighbors during social hours and yoga classes. Most had adult children, and many had experienced some version of what I was going through. My daughter wanted me to move to Alaska to help with her kids, said Ruth, a petite former accountant I met in the coffee lounge. I told her I'd lived through 60 Michigan winters and wasn't starting over with Alaskan ones just to be her babysitter. My sons fought over who wouldn't have to take me in after my hip replacement. Leonard, a retired physics teacher, told me during a card game. Now they fight over who gets to visit me here because I'm actually happy and they feel guilty. These stories comforted me, though Brandon's silence grew heavier each day. I texted him weekly updates about my new address, about the water aerobics class I'd joined, about finding a local doctor, but received only terse acknowledgments in return. Arthur became a steady presence in my new life. He'd appear at my door suggesting a walk or save me a seat at movie night. I learned he was a retired English professor who'd lost his wife to breast cancer 5 years earlier. He played piano beautifully, told terrible jokes, and made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. You should join the art class, he suggested one morning as we walked the grounds. I've seen you sketching on your balcony, I demurred, embarrassed. I'm just doodling, I haven't really painted since college. All the more reason to start again. Sophia says the instructor is excellent, very encouraging for beginners and returners alike. The following Tuesday, I found myself in the bright art studio with a blank canvas before me. The instructor, Gabriella, suggested I start with something meaningful. Paint what you've been missing, she said. By the end of the 2-hour class, I'd created a simple watercolor of the Italian countryside I'd always dreamed of visiting. It wasn't technically impressive, but something in the colors and light captured the longing I'd carried for decades. Italy? Arthur asked, examining my painting as we left class. The Tuscany region, I admitted. Harold and I always talked about going when he retired. Then he got sick, and after that there never seemed to be a right time. Arthur was quiet for a moment. There's an Italian class starting next month, taught by Francesca in 4C. She grew up in Florence. Several of us are signing up. The old Margaret would have laughed off the suggestion. Too impractical, too self-indulgent. But the new Margaret heard herself say, "That sounds wonderful." A month into my new life, Brandon and Olivia finally came to visit. I'd invited them for lunch, hoping the neutral timing would ease tensions. I spent the morning preparing a quiche and salad, arranging flowers from the community garden, and nervously rearranging furniture. They arrived precisely at noon, Brandon's expression stony, Olivia visibly pregnant already in a loose dress. "This is quite the place," Brandon said, looking around my apartment with raised eyebrows. "No wonder you couldn't help us with the down payment." I let the barb pass. "Would you like the tour? It's not large, but the layout is very efficient." I showed them the bedroom with its adjoining bath, the compact but well-equipped kitchen, and the living room with sliding glass doors opening to a small balcony. "And this is all you need?" Olivia asked, her tone suggesting she found the space inadequate. "It's perfect for me," I replied. "Plus, I have access to the whole community, the dining room, library, pool, gardens." "Like a fancy dorm," Brandon muttered. We sat down to lunch, the conversation stilted and formal. I asked about Olivia's pregnancy, and she brightened slightly, describing their plans for the nursery. "We're converting the guest room," she said. "Though now we're not sure where visitors will stay." The pointed comment hung in the air. "I assume you found a house?" I asked, changing the subject. Brandon nodded curtly. "We had to settle for something smaller than we wanted, in a neighborhood with less desirable schools. The mortgage is brutal," Olivia added. "And now with the baby coming, I'll need to take at least 3 months off work. We're not sure how we'll manage financially." I recognized the setup. They were laying the groundwork for another request for help. "Parenthood always involves sacrifices," I said gently. "You find ways to make it work." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Yes, most parents understand sacrifice. Most grandparents too." Before I could respond, a knock came at my door. It was Arthur, elegantly casual in a blue button-down shirt. "Sorry to interrupt," he said when I opened the door. "I just wanted to confirm our dinner reservations for tonight." "Hello there," he added, nodding politely to Brandon and Olivia. I introduced them, watching Brandon's eyes narrow as he assessed Arthur. "Dinner reservations?" Brandon asked after Arthur left. "Arthur's introducing me to his favorite Italian restaurant," I explained. "In preparation for our language class." "Language class," Brandon repeated flatly. "So while we're struggling to afford childcare, you're dadding and taking up Italian." "I'm making friends and pursuing interests," I corrected. "Things I put on hold for 40 years while raising a family and caring for my parents." "How nice for you," Olivia said with brittle politeness. After they left, I sat on my balcony watching butterflies flit among the flowering bushes below. Their visit had gone exactly as I'd feared. But underneath the guilt was something new, a sense that I was finally standing my ground, however uncomfortable it felt. That evening, Arthur took me to a charming Italian restaurant owned by a family from Naples. Over pasta and wine, I told him about Brandon and Olivia's visit. They made it clear they're struggling financially with the new house and baby coming, I concluded. I felt terrible but also manipulated. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "It's the eternal parental dilemma, isn't it? When does supporting become enabling? When does sacrifice become self-erasure?" "I never thought I'd have to ask those questions at 68, I admitted. "Better late than never," he said, raising his glass in a toast. The next morning, I attended my first watercolor class as an official member rather than a drop-in. The instructor announced we'd be starting a series of paintings reflecting our life journeys. "Begin with something that represents your past," Gabriella suggested. I stared at the blank paper, then began painting the small Cape Cod house where Brandon had grown up. I added details I remembered clearly: the maple tree with the tire swing, the rose bushes Harold had tended so carefully, the porch swing where I'd read stories to Brandon on summer evenings. As I painted, memories flowed through me, both sweet and bittersweet. The birthday parties, the Christmas mornings, the homework battles, the teenage arguments, the sound of Harold's laugh, the way Brandon had hugged me before leaving for college. I was so absorbed that I didn't notice Gabriella beside me until she spoke. "You're home?" she asked softly. "It was," I replied, realizing with surprise that I didn't feel the ache I'd expected. "But not anymore." That afternoon, I enrolled in the Italian class Arthur had mentioned. As I filled out the registration form, I felt a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with guilt or obligation or fear. It felt like freedom. That night, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been contemplating for weeks. I booked a spot on a guided tour of Tuscany scheduled for the following spring. 10 days exploring Florence, Siena, and the countryside I'd only seen in pictures. I'd be 70 by then. Not too old to finally see the world. Not too old to begin again. The next morning, Brandon called. I answered warily, expecting another guilt trip. Mom, he said, his voice tight. Olivia had some spotting yesterday. The doctor says everything is probably fine, but she needs to reduce stress and cut back her hours at work sooner than we planned. My heart clenched with genuine concern. I'm so sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to help? There was a pause, and I realized he'd expected me to offer financial assistance immediately. Well, that's why I'm calling, he said finally. We're going to be short on the mortgage by about $1,000 a month until after the baby comes. I was hoping you could help us out temporarily. I closed my eyes, conflicted. I wanted to support my son and future grandchild, but I also recognized the pattern reestablishing itself. I can help, I said carefully, but not with cash. What if I hire a meal delivery service for you both? Good nutrition is important during pregnancy, and it would take the pressure off cooking. His silence told me this wasn't the answer he wanted. We need actual financial help, Mom, not meals. I understand, but I've structured my finances carefully for my retirement. I can offer practical support instead. After a tense conversation, he grudgingly accepted the meal service offer. Before hanging up, he added, Olivia's baby shower is next month. Her mother's planning it. I assume you'll want to be there. It wasn't quite an invitation, more an expectation. But it was something. I wouldn't miss it, I promised. The meal delivery service I arranged for Brandon and Olivia cost nearly as much as the mortgage help they'd requested. But it was on my terms, support without submission. Each week, they received prepared meals they only needed to heat, along with fresh fruit and healthy snacks. Olivia sent me a polite thank you text with a photo of their first delivery. For Olivia's baby shower, I purchased a practical stroller from their registry and added a handmade blanket I'd crocheted during evening craft sessions at Sunset Palms. The shower itself was an uncomfortable affair hosted by Olivia's mother in her sprawling suburban home. I sat among Olivia's friends and family, feeling like an outsider as they discussed people and events I didn't know. Margaret, I understand you've moved into one of those retirement communities, Olivia's mother, Catherine, said during a lull in conversation. Wasn't your house big enough to accommodate Brandon and Olivia? My sister moved in with her daughter when she had twins. Such a blessing for everyone. Before I could respond, Olivia interjected. Mom, we've discussed this. Margaret preferred her independence. The slight emphasis on my name rather than Mom didn't escape me. I'm just saying family should stick together, Catherine continued. Especially with a baby coming. I'll be visiting regularly once the baby arrives, I said, keeping my tone light. Quality time as a grandmother rather than quantity time as a housekeeper. Catherine's eyebrows rose, but thankfully the gift opening began, sparing me further interrogation. During the following weeks, my life at Sunset Palms expanded in unexpected ways. The Italian class proved challenging but enjoyable. Arthur and I studied together in the community library, practicing phrases and laughing at our terrible accents. Our friendship deepened into something more as autumn arrived, bringing cool evenings perfect for walks through the gardens and concerts in the community hall. You seem different, Arthur observed one evening as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. More vibrant than when you first arrived. I considered this. I think I'm remembering who I was before I became just someone's wife or mother or caretaker. There's a version of Margaret that existed before all those roles who had her own dreams and interests. I like that Margaret, he said, taking my hand. I'm starting to like her too. Brandon and I maintained a strained relationship through texts and occasional brief phone calls. He'd accepted that I wasn't moving in or providing a substantial financial contribution, but resentment simmered beneath his grudging civility. Then came the day that upended everything. I was returning from an afternoon watercolor class, arms full of supplies and a painting I'd just completed, a view of the gardens that Gabriella had praised as showing real progress, when my phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. Mom, his voice was higher than normal, panicked. Olivia's in the hospital. She collapsed at work. The doctors say it's preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. They're monitoring the baby, but she's only at 30 weeks. I'm on my way, I said immediately, setting down my painting. Which hospital? An hour later, I was hurrying through hospital corridors that felt both foreign and familiar after my years as a nurse. I found Brandon in a waiting area, his face pale, hair disheveled. They're doing an emergency C-section, he said as I approached. They said the baby's in distress. I sat beside him and took his hand. In that moment, all our conflicts seemed trivial. He was my child, frightened and in need of comfort. Olivia's young and was healthy before the pregnancy, I reassured him, drawing on my medical background. In 30 weeks, while early, gives the baby a very good chance. Medicine has advanced tremendously for premature infants. He nodded, clinging to my hand like he had as a child during thunderstorms. What if something happens to them? Let's not borrow trouble, I said gently. The medical team knows what they're doing. We waited together for 2 hours, making small talk that danced around our tensions. Finally, a doctor appeared, still in surgical scrubs. Mr. Collins, your wife is stable. The blood pressure issues resolved once we delivered the baby. She'll need monitoring for a while, but she should recover fully. Brandon sagged with relief. And the baby? Your daughter is in the NICU. She's small, just under 4 pounds, and her lungs need some help, but her other systems are functioning well. You can see her shortly. A granddaughter. Despite everything, joy bloomed in my chest. Over the next few days, I became a fixture at the hospital. My nursing background proved invaluable as I explained medical terminology and procedures to Brandon and Olivia. The tiny baby, whom they named Lily, needed respiratory support and would remain in the NICU for several weeks, but her prognosis was good. Olivia, pale and subdued after her ordeal, was different toward me. The medical emergency had stripped away pretenses. Thank you for being here, she said on her 3rd day in the hospital. Brandon told me how you explained everything the doctors were saying in ways we could understand. Of course, I replied, adjusting her pillows with the automatic instinct of a former nurse. That's what family does. I misjudged you, she admitted quietly. I thought you were selfish for choosing Sunset Palms over us. I considered my response carefully. We all make choices based on our own needs and perspectives. Mine may not have been what you expected, but they weren't meant to hurt you. After Olivia was discharged, the true challenges began. They had prepared for maternity leave, but not for a premature baby requiring extended hospital stays and specialist appointments. Brandon took family leave, but it was unpaid. Their financial situation, already precarious, became dire. One evening, Brandon arrived at the hospital looking haggard after I'd spent the afternoon sitting with Lily so he could shower and change clothes. I don't know how we're going to manage, he confessed as we walked to the parking lot together. The mortgage is due next week, and I'm already behind on the utility bills. Olivia can't go back to work anytime soon, and my leave is unpaid after the first 2 weeks. I listened, hearing the familiar setup for a request for help. But this time I heard something else too, genuine desperation from a new parent facing circumstances beyond his control. I could help with the mortgage for a few months, I offered, surprising myself. As a loan, not a gift. He stopped walking and stared at me. Why would you do that now after refusing before? Because this is an emergency, not emotional manipulation. And because I care about all of you, including Lily. His face crumpled suddenly, years of tension and recent stress breaking through his composure. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything. For treating you like you owed us your life savings and free labor. For making you feel like you weren't allowed to have your own life. The apology, unexpected and raw, pierced straight through the armor I'd built around my heart. I've missed you, I admitted, my own eyes filling with tears. I never wanted to lose my relationship with you. I just couldn't keep sacrificing myself entirely. We hugged in the fluorescent glare of the hospital parking garage, an awkward but genuine reconciliation. Olivia and I have been talking, he said as we separated. About how we treated you. About the ultimatum we gave you. We were wrong. We all make mistakes, I said. The important thing is learning from them. The day before I was scheduled to help Brandon and Olivia bring Lily home from the hospital, my phone rang just after dawn. It was Arthur. "Have you seen the sunrise?" he asked without preamble. "It's spectacular this morning." I stepped onto my balcony. The sky was painted in bands of pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that seems almost too beautiful to be real. "I see it," I replied softly. "I was thinking," he said, his voice warm through the phone, "about Italy and our language class and how life can surprise you when you least expect it." "What were you thinking specifically?" "That I'd very much like to join you on that Tuscany tour next spring if you'd have the company." My heart fluttered with an emotion I hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that very much." "Excellent," he said, "because I may have already booked my ticket." As I watched the sunrise transform the sky, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the ultimatum that had seemed so cruel to the gift of independence it had ultimately granted me. From the pain of standing my ground to the joy of rediscovering myself, there would still be challenges ahead. Boundaries to maintain, a new relationship with my son and his family to navigate, a granddaughter to love without sacrificing my own needs. But for the first time in decades, I was choosing my path rather than having it dictated by others' expectations. I visited Italy in April, as the Tuscan countryside was bursting into spring. Arthur and I walked cobblestone streets in Florence, admired art in museums, and sipped wine in hillside villages. I sketched the landscapes in a new watercolor book, capturing sunlight on ancient stone and cypress trees silhouetted against blue skies. "You should frame these when we get home," Arthur said, watching me add color to an outline of a medieval tower home. Sunset Palms had truly become that now, a place I returned to with pleasure rather than resignation. Before leaving for Italy, I'd helped Brandon and Olivia bring Lily home from the hospital after her 5-week stay in the NICU. Their apartment was chaotic, both of them sleep-deprived and overwhelmed. The financial help I'd provided eased one burden, but the challenges of a premature baby created others. "I could come by twice a week," I offered as Olivia rocked a fussing Lily. "Give you both a break for a few hours." Olivia looked up, shadows under her eyes. "You would do that?" "Of course, I may have chosen my own space, but that doesn't mean I don't want to be part of your lives." We established a rhythm. Tuesdays and Saturdays I would arrive mid-morning and stay until early evening. I'd hold Lily while Olivia napped or showered. I'd fold laundry and sometimes prepare meals, not because it was expected, but because I wanted to help. The difference was subtle but profound. I came as a visitor, not a resident. My assistance was a gift, not an obligation. And when I returned to Sunset Palms in the evenings, I had my own life waiting. Italian class with Arthur, book club with Vivian, watercolor sessions where my skills continued to improve. When I returned from Italy, bronzed from the Tuscan sun and refreshed by the break from routine, I visited Brandon and Olivia the next day. Lily had grown, her premature fragility giving way to chubby cheeks and alert eyes. At 4 months old, she'd overcome most of her early challenges. "She looks more like you every day," Olivia remarked as I cradled Lily. "Poor child," I joked, but secretly pleased by the observation. "How was Italy?" Brandon asked, genuinely interested. I showed them photos on my tablet, Arthur and me in front of the Duomo, countryside views from our tour bus, plates of pasta in charming restaurants. "You look so happy," Brandon said, studying a picture of me laughing beside a fountain. "I am happy," I replied simply. "And Arthur seems nice," he added tentatively. Our relationship was healing, but certain topics remained delicate. "He is very kind, very thoughtful." "Is it serious?" Olivia asked with uncharacteristic directness. I considered the question. Arthur and I had grown closer over our months together, especially during our trip abroad. We'd shared hotel rooms in Italy, our relationship evolving naturally from friendship to something deeper. "I care about him very much," I said carefully. "But we're not rushing anything. At our age, we both know what we want and what we don't." What I didn't say was how refreshing it felt to be with someone who saw me as a complete person, not defined by what I could provide for others. Arthur valued my opinions, my newfound artistic pursuits, my independence. Over the next months, I maintained my balance, being present for Brandon's family without sacrificing my own needs. I arranged for them to visit Sunset Palms for community events, introducing them to my friends. Lily was passed around like a celebrity among residents who delighted in a baby's presence. She has your eyes, Arthur observed as he held her during one such visit. And hopefully not my stubbornness, I replied. I would say persistence rather than stubbornness, he corrected with a smile. A valuable trait she'd be lucky to inherit. Brandon overheard this exchange, and later, as they were preparing to leave, he pulled me aside. He's good for you, he said. I see that now. Just as Olivia is good for you, I replied. We were wrong about what we asked of you before, he said, the most direct acknowledgement yet of their ultimatum. I was worried about finances, but we're managing. And seeing you now, I understand why you couldn't give up your life for hours. The admission warmed something in me that had remained cold despite our improved relationship. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means a lot. The following week, I received an unexpected invitation to dinner at Brandon and Olivia's apartment. They'd never hosted me for a meal before. Our reconciliation had mostly occurred on neutral ground or at Sunset Palms. I arrived with flowers and a small gift for Lily, uncertain what to expect. Their apartment was tidier than I'd seen it since Lily's birth, and delicious smells came from the kitchen. I hope you like lasagna, Olivia said, taking the flowers. It's my grandmother's recipe. I love it, I assured her. Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. We talked about Lily's development, Brandon's work, Olivia's plans to return to her job part-time. I shared stories from my watercolor class where I'd recently been asked to exhibit in the community gallery. After we'd finished eating, Brandon cleared his throat nervously. Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something. Olivia and I have been discussing childcare arrangements for when she goes back to work. I tensed slightly, wondering if another request for my full-time help was coming. We found a wonderful daycare center near my office, Olivia continued. They have an excellent infant program. I nodded, relieved but confused about why this required a special dinner. But Brandon added, we were hoping you might still want to have Lily one day a week, if that works with your schedule, of course. We absolutely understand if it doesn't. The careful phrasing, so different from their entitled assumptions of a year ago, made me smile. I would love that, I said. Perhaps Wednesday, I could bring her to Sunset Palms. There's a lovely children's area in the library, and the gardens are perfect for stroller walks. They exchanged glances, clearly relieved. Wednesdays would be perfect, Olivia said. And maybe sometimes you could bring Arthur too. Lily should know everyone who's important in her grandmother's life. 1 year after moving to Sunset Palms, I hosted a dinner party in my apartment. Vivian and her new companion Richard were there, along with Arthur and Brandon's family. My living room was now adorned with my framed watercolors, including the Tuscan landscapes and several portraits of Lily at different stages. The balcony doors stood open to the warm spring evening. Lily, now a toddling 1-year-old, was passed among adoring adults. The dinner table barely fit everyone, but somehow we managed, shoulders touching in friendly proximity. As I carried in the dessert I'd prepared, a tiramisu inspired by our Italian trip, I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. My son and his wife laughing at something Arthur had said. My granddaughter secure in the knowledge she was loved. My friends who had become a chosen family. My apartment filled with evidence of my rediscovered passions. This was what I had fought for. Not isolation, not selfishness, but the right to be a complete person with a life of my own, connected to my family on terms that respected everyone's needs. A toast, Arthur said, raising his glass once I'd served dessert. To Margaret, who taught all of us about courage and new beginnings. Brandon raised his glass. To Mom, who showed me it's never too late to start living the life you want. Later, after everyone had gone and Arthur had stayed behind to help clean up, we sat on my balcony in comfortable silence. The community gardens below were illuminated by soft lighting, and stars speckled the clear night sky. I've been thinking, Arthur said, taking my hand. A dangerous pastime, I teased. He smiled. What would you think about sharing an apartment? The two bedrooms on the south side have better views, and we could convert the second bedroom into a proper studio for your painting. I considered the proposal. 6 months ago, it might have felt like surrendering my hard-won independence. Now it felt like a natural evolution. I think I'd like that very much, I said. No rush, he assured me. We've got all the time in the world. As we sat hand in hand under the night sky, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, afraid to claim space for myself, defined by what I could give to others. The ultimatum that had seemed so cruel had become the catalyst for my transformation. Brandon had given me two choices: serve his fiancée or give him my savings. Instead, I'd found a third option, choosing myself. In doing so, I hadn't lost my family but redefined our relationship into something healthier for all of us. My mother had taught me to sacrifice everything for others. I was teaching my granddaughter something different: that loving yourself is not selfish but necessary, that boundaries are healthy, that it's never too late to put yourself first. And perhaps most importantly, that sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most unexpected joys.